Russian intelligence officers for interfering in the 2016 election.
It was important for the president to know what information we've uncovered because he's got to make very important decisions for the country.
This hour, we'll discuss all the issues at this summit: election meddling, Syria, Ukraine, and arms control, with the U.S. ambassador to Russia, Jon Huntsman, and with Democratic Senator Chris Coons, who says President Trump should demand Russian intelligence stop their cyber attacks. Then, we'll review President Trump's tense meeting with NATO leaders. Is he treating adversaries better than longtime U.S. allies?
Now, if you look at it, Germany is a captive of Russia. They're getting so much of the oil and gas from Russia.
And
Judge Kavanaugh has impeccable credentials, unsurpassed qualifications, and a proven commitment to equal justice under the law.
President Trump's Supreme Court nominee heads to Capitol Hill as the confirmation battle starts. We'll ask our Sunday panel about Democratic efforts to block Judge Brett Kavanaugh. All right now on Fox News Sunday. You are looking live at the presidential palace in Helsinki, where President Trump will meet tomorrow with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The 19th century palace overlooking the waterfront Market Square and the Baltic Sea is the same place where George H.W. Bush met with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev 28 years ago. And hello again from Fox News today in Finland. Monday's summit will be the first in-depth meeting between the two leaders as they discuss trouble spots across the globe. But casting a shadow over the summit, the new indictment of Russian intelligence officers for interfering in the 2016 election. In a moment, we'll discuss expectations for the talks with U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Jon Huntsman. And tomorrow, I'll sit down for an exclusive interview with President Putin on Fox News Channel and get first word on what the two leaders discussed. But first, let's bring in Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts here in Helsinki. John.
Chris, good afternoon to you. President Trump is lowering expectations for what might come out of tomorrow's summit here in Helsinki, saying it might not amount to much. But one thing is clear, these two leaders do have an awful lot to talk about. President Trump is seeking to distance himself from the Friday indictment of 12 Russian agents for meddling in the 2016 election. The president tweeting, "These Russian individuals did their work during the Obama years. Why didn't Obama do something about it? Because he thought crooked Hillary would win. That's why." On Friday, the Deputy Attorney General said there was definitely an attempt by Russian operatives to throw the election.
The conspirators created fictitious online personas, including DC Leaks and Guccifer 2.0. And they used those personas to release information. They discussed the timing of the release in an attempt to enhance the impact on the election.
President Trump promised he will bring up Russian meddling in the election when he meets with Putin. Back home, Democrats declared there is no way the two leaders should meet in private.
There should be no one-on-one meeting between this president and Mr. Putin. There needs to be other Americans in the room.
Putin has repeatedly denied any Russian involvement in election meddling, an assertion repeated by President Trump just 2 weeks ago. The indictments would seem to tell a different story. Despite assessments from members of his own party that the president appears eager to cozy up to Putin, even as he slams America's allies, President Trump insists he is holding Putin to account.
I guarantee whoever it is in Russia, they're saying, oh, gee, do we wish that Trump was not the victor in that election. We have been far tougher on Russia than anybody.
British diplomats tell Fox News that President Trump has indeed been tough on Russia, but there are concerns that in looking to improve relations with Vladimir Putin, the president might give away too much. For example, at that Friday press conference at Chequers with Theresa May, the president told me he did think it was possible for the United States and Russia to improve relations, even if Russia continues to occupy Crimea. Chris?
John Roberts reporting here in Helsinki. John, thank you. Joining me now, the U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Jon Huntsman. Ambassador, welcome back to Fox News
Thank you,
Sunday.
Chris. Pleasure to be with you.
I want to start with President Trump's comments coming into the summit this week in Helsinki. Here he is.
So I have NATO, I have the UK, which is in somewhat turmoil, and I have Putin. Frankly, Putin may be the easiest of them all. Who would think?
Ambassador, do you view the president's meeting with Putin as the easiest he has this week?
Well, I would say that the president is our most experienced negotiator, elected president in recent years. Putin similarly is a very experienced negotiator. He's an intelligence operative. That's how he approaches all of his subjects, thinking in terms of an intelligence operation. They're both very experienced and wise to the world. For the president, the challenges are certainly there, but I think he's genuinely looking forward to sitting across the table and trying to reduce the tension in a relationship where our collective blood pressure is off the charts high. And it's not good for the United States, and it's not good for the world.
The reason I ask is that you briefed the media before the president left for Europe, and here's some of what you had to say. The ball really is in Russia's court, and the president will continue to hold Russia accountable for its malign activities. Just to make sure, I looked up malign in a dictionary, and as I thought, it means evil. What Russian activities do you consider evil?
Well, trying to influence other elections, not only our own, but those in Europe, tampering with the Brexit vote, funding nefarious political movements within Europe. The list goes on and on and on. So when the president looks at the totality of the Russia relationship, this is one piece of it, addressing their malign activity and their election meddling. But there's a whole lot more that is part of our relationship that has to be discussed too. We can't turn our back to what has happened. We have to learn from it, be informed, and be smart going forward. But I think as the president approaches, he's looking at arms control. Probably the most important issue we have here is non-proliferation. The two countries are 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. You have Syria, you have North Korea, you have Ukraine, and you have a lot of bilateral issues.
I'm going to get into a few of those issues in a moment, but just generally speaking, what does President Trump want from Putin at this summit in terms of changes in specific policies, and what is he prepared to give him in return?
Well, it's premature to say what anybody is going to get in return, because the president is coming into the summit with 460 sanctions against individuals and entities. They will stay until there is concrete movement on some of the issues that matter most, namely Ukraine. So what the president will be looking for, and listen, he's been totally consistent on this since my first conversation with him. He says, I want to reduce the risk. I want to take the element of danger such that I can out of the U.S.-Russia relationship. We are 90% of the nuclear weapons. We have overlapping interests in Syria. If we can't fix those, chances are we're going to find ourselves in a very small combat zone, which could lead to some very dangerous outcomes. So I think the key here is this is the first time that President Trump has met across the table with President Putin. They met on the sidelines of Hamburg G20. They met the APEC summit in Vietnam, but they haven't had an opportunity to actually sit across the table, get to know each other, and actually sort through the issues that really matter. So key will be, where do we have overlapping and shared interests? I can tell you where we don't have interests, and so can the rest of the world. But where is it where we can actually join forces to make the world somewhat more stable? That's just not happening right now, and it's not going to happen until the heads of state deem these to be important.
A number of foreign policy experts are concerned that we'll see here in Helsinki what we saw in Singapore, where President Trump seemed to make unilateral concessions to North Korean Chairman Kim in terms of the U.S. suspending participation in war games with South Korea and not get anything specific in return. Can you assure our viewers, can you assure the American people that the president will not recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea, that he will not pull U.S. troops out of Syria, and that he will do nothing in this meeting to weaken the NATO defense alliance?
The president's a chief negotiator, not me. He has a good sense of what these issues are. He has a good sense of where he wants to go. He wants to improve this bilateral relationship, and he wants to find ourselves on the same page in some of these common interest areas. There's no guarantee that this is going to work out, Chris, but you're never going to know until you take that first step, and that first step has not been taken until tomorrow.
But, and I understand your position. You're the ambassador, he's the president, but you can't rule out the possibility he might recognize Russia's annexation of Crimea?
Highly unlikely. Crimea was a violation of international law. We all recognize that. That's U.S. policy. You look at eastern Ukraine, the two so-called breakaway provinces in Donbass, violation of international law. Not only for us, but for the Europeans as well. These are very, very serious issues, and issues that we have some serious sanctions tied to, by the way. I mentioned the 460 sanctions that we have against individuals and entities. These sanctions are not going to all of a sudden disappear until there is movement in terms of settling out some of these ongoing issues.
You say another thing that the U.S. needs to do at this summit and just generally is to hold Russia accountable for its meddling in the 2016 election. Now, as you well know, the Justice Department announced a new indictment on Friday of 12 Russian military officers for hacking into Democratic computers, stealing information, and then releasing it to the American public in the hopes of disrupting the election. Do you have any doubt that the GRU, Russian military intelligence, conducted these operations?
You're asking me personally, having had access to information that maybe other people don't have access to. Those who have followed this issue closely, there's very little doubt in my mind about what we're seeing. The investigation will have rolled up almost 30 Russians in total. The process and the investigation are playing out, and that's part of holding Russia accountable and responsible for election meddling and malign activity. It's part of getting through our relationship, Chris. This is part of it. But let me tell you something else. We've got to, at some point, quit looking in the rearview mirror. We have to be informed by what we've been through and use that to educate us as we go forward. But at some point, we have to look forward and around the bend. We have an election coming up in November, and if there is meddling in the election this November, like we saw in 2016, we're not going to have much of a relationship left. And all of these other issues that we're talking about and trying to find common ground is going to be exceedingly difficult to do. So we have a real-world case study that's about to play out in November that's going to be very important in this bilateral relationship. They know it, and we know it, and we brought it up time and time again. And we'll have to see if this is a test, ultimately, of whether or not we can get through the months ahead.
You say you have very little doubt that the Russian state, Russian military intelligence was involved in this interference, disruption, or attempt at it of the 2016 election. I ask you about that because here's what President Trump said yesterday about the indictments. Let's put it up on the screen. He tweeted this: "The stories you heard about the 12 Russians yesterday took place during the Obama administration, not the Trump administration."